The wall that had separated West and East Germany for 28 years falls. The German Democratic Republic is coming to an end, and East and West are finally reunited after 40 years of separation. The images of jubilant and celebrating people lying in each other's arms go around the world. With reunification, the economically isolated East is finally to be made strong again. Helmut Kohl, then Chancellor, promised, "Through a joint effort, the East will soon be transformed once again into flourishing landscapes in which it is worth living and work worthwhile." Yet even today, more than 30 years later, the eastern part still seems to be the problem child of the nation. Salaries of the eastern population are on average 23% lower than those of the western population, and the unemployment rate of 7.9% is also well above the West German level of 5.9%. As a result, more people are also affected by poverty. In 2020, 17.8% of East Germans were poor or at risk of poverty. In Western Germany, the figure was just under 15% lower. The entire business landscape seems unable to keep up with the West. Not a single of the 30 most important German stock exchange groups comes from the East. The same applies to the 20 largest newspaper publishers. They are all based in the West. The inequality is also reflected in the occupation of management positions. In 2020, only 2 of Germany's top managers were born in the East, while 65% in the West and 33% are foreigners. Among generals and admirals, the share of East Germans is as low as 1%. Overall, East German production is still significantly less productive than West German production. Even in the best years, labor productivity was only about 80% of that in the West. No East German state manages to be as productive as the least productive state in the West. What caused Kohl's utopian dream to fail? The GDR had come into being in 1945 after the end of World War II, when the Soviet occupying power, with the help of the Socialist Unity Party, declared the eastern part of Germany a new state. The official state ideology was Marxism-Leninism. Like the Soviet Union as a whole, the Socialist Unity Party was a communist regime with a state-led planned economic system. The German Democratic Republic had little in the way of democracy. It quickly turned out to be a dictatorship, which suppressed dissenting citizens and controlled them with comprehensive observation organs. Its widespread dissatisfaction with the political and economic system led to an ever-increasing number of people leaving the East for a better life in the West. To prevent citizens from leaving, the Berlin Wall was built in 1961. When the GDR was dissolved in 1989 as a result of the peaceful revolution and the territory was united with the West, it lagged far behind economically. While in free market economy in West Germany, the GDR's planned economy had been bound to state guidelines. It was not supply and demand that regulated the economy, but rather central government guidelines. In any case, there were hardly any private companies left. Almost all of them had been nationalized in the course of the division and merged into huge, large-scale enterprises. Nearly 95% of all citizens had been employed in these state-owned production cooperatives. The primary products were agricultural and industrial goods, while the consumer-related service sector was considered anti-communist and was not allowed to grow. Due to economic isolation and a lack of will to progress through competition, the East German economy was not very efficient. For example, in the case of a microchip produced in the 1980s in West Germany for the equivalent of 6 marks, the cost in East Germany was 536 marks. It can be said without exaggeration that the economy of the GDR was extremely inefficient and backward due to the lack of competition and faulty planning. Shortly before the turnaround, East Germany's labor productivity was less than 30% of the level of West Germany. Then came the turnaround and the failing system was overturned. Capitalism, free market, open borders. Suddenly, everything was possible. This abrupt transformation was a great shock to the population and the economy. The huge state-owned enterprises were dissolved overnight and privatized in parts, as production was to be adapted to West German demand as quickly as possible, a challenge which not every company was able to meet. At the same time, the goods, which were often produced in inferior quality, suddenly had to compete with the supply from the West. Since the unification not only unified the people, but also the currency, the former trading partners, for the most part Eastern European countries, were suddenly not able to afford the East German products because the newly introduced German mark was much stronger than the former GDR mark. Not only the products became more expensive, but also the labor force. Before reunification, East German wages were only about 7% of the West German wages, which was also due to the low value of the GDR mark. With the change to the Deutsche Mark, wages inevitably had to rise as well, by 500% within the first year. Hardly any entrepreneurs could afford these wage increases, which is why there were mass layoffs. Almost 80% of all jobs in the former GDR were lost within a few years. In 1993, the East German unemployment rate was over 15%. After decades of oppression and without good prospects for the future, a lot of people had the idea of leaving the East. In the first year after reunification alone, 800,000 citizens had turned their backs on their former place of residence. Several million people were to leave the East on their way to find new jobs in the West. Even today, Eastern Germany is less densely populated than it was 100 years ago. The government quickly realized that the East needed financial support and developed a historically unique support program, the Solidarity Surcharge. This is a levy that all workers in Germany paid until 2021 every month unless they earned very little money. The Solidarity Surcharge is 5.5% of wage or income tax and is also levied on other income. Many Germans associate this tax closely with the construction of the East. Originally, however, it was introduced in 1991 primarily to cover the costs of the Second Gulf War. In the mid-1990s, the Solidarity Surcharge became an additional levy to finance German unity, which goes to the federal government. The tax should help to adjust the unequal living conditions between the East and West and to co-finance corresponding measures. This tax has always been paid by all Germans, regardless of whether they come from West or East. It is important to say that the income from the surcharge did not only go to East Germany, but could be used for various things. A total of 1.6 trillion euros of tax money has flowed into the region to date. But before there could be any thought of an economic upswing, this money had to be used first to rehabilitate the region. Instead of promoting companies or making the business location of East Germany more attractive, billions of euros were spent on urban renewal, highway construction, medical care, and university funding. No large companies settled in Eastern Germany. Instead, the region is traditionally characterized by many small and medium-sized enterprises which are less efficient and create fewer jobs. The main problem still seems to be the lack of productivity in Eastern German industry. Although it has risen rapidly from 30% of the West German level to 80% of that, it has since stagnated there. In addition, East German manufacturers more often cover products in lower price segments. 70% of all industrial products in the West achieve higher prices than their East German counterparts. According to experts, Eastern Germany will continue to lag behind economically in the future. The consequences of almost half a century of planned economy cannot be repaired so quickly. One must not forget that the region has made a huge leap forward in a very short time. The GDP per capita has tripled since the fall of communism. Medical care has reached the level of the West, and even average life expectancy has caught up with the West. In 2017, more people moved in than moved out of the East for the first time. The painstaking urban redevelopment, modern universities, and comparatively low prices are attracting students in particular these days. Perhaps the East simply needs a little more time.